Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this week to this edition of the CEO MasterMind.Ai Podcast. I have a dear friend and mentor, Sachin Patel. Honestly, I've been excited for this for quite some time. I cannot tell you how many times I've been sitting beside Sachin at a lunch table, dinner table, various masterminds and conferences. And I gotta admit, you blow me away every single time. And I think the audience is in for a treat here today. Today, we're going to talk really about high performance and why pay attention to your health and breathing and snoring and all these sorts of things that you've talked about on stages, sort of in the hallways. I'll be the first to admit several years ago, when people talked about meditation or breathing, I thought it was the absolute most ridiculous thing to be talking about. And I do this every day. I do it naturally. What are you talking about? I mean, I'm probably be the biggest skeptic around. And you and I just spoke just before we opened up the recording here. And I realized a couple of nights ago, I was really stressed because I took a deep breath. And in that deep breath, I felt a lot of like pressure in my chest and tension. I was like, whoa. And I followed some of the techniques that I hope you'll talk about today that you talked about at an event we were at conference a couple months ago. And I was like, okay, what did Sachin say? I went through that process and I was able to relax. But I didn't know until I took a deep breath that my nervous system was out of sync. Sometimes I'll do that on purpose and I'll check in. I'll just take a deep breath. And if I feel I can take a deep breath and exhale without friction or something being off, and I'm like, all right, I'm okay. I'm kind of chill. My HRV, my heart rate's fine. I had a good sleep. But I now do that based on a conversation we had to figure out, I don't know if I'm in a state of inflammation, in a state of flight. And for me, that's an indicator for me. But welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being a friend, a mentor, always sharing your knowledge. The world is blessed to have people like you. So I really appreciate you taking your time today and just to share your message, your story. And if you can give us a little bit of background about your journey and your message, and we'll kind of get right into it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I've always enjoyed our conversations. The feeling is mutual. I learn a lot from you as well. So thank you for doing this. And thank you for bringing this message to the world. I would say that just like you, I was very skeptical and I thought breathing, I've been doing this my whole life. Nobody's taught me how. Probably doesn't mean that I need to learn this. And it wasn't until I started going through some, I wouldn't say health challenges, but certainly we expect our kids to be perfect, right? Just like we are. Of course, that's a joke.
Yeah.
And when my sons got cavities, the first time he went to the dentist, he was diagnosed with having a bunch of cavities. Good news was that they were in his baby teeth. That was the first clue into dysfunctional breathing. And then the second clue was when he went to the dentist later on, and they said that he's got overcrowding in his teeth. And he's going to need to have some of his teeth removed, and then he'll need braces. And, my thought was, I've never had teeth removed. Why does he have to have teeth removed? Like, that doesn't make sense. What if dentists didn't exist? What would people do? And so that's always my question. Is there something wrong, or is there something that we could do different? And that's around the time I learned about James Nestor's book called Breath, and realized that the way we breathe actually shapes our facial structure. And I didn't know that. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it. In fact, simply by changing the position of the tongue, you can change the shape of somebody's face. Now, that happens from a very young age, and it's never too late for that to change. In fact, when I started changing my breathing, my facial structure changed as well. And I have pictures to actually prove it. So that was the second clue that breathing was important. And the third clue, and really in my quest as a clinician to find the simplest, fastest, most affordable, most scalable solution to help people get healthy, I stumbled across breathing. So breathing is literally the simplest yet most sophisticated tool that we have, and one of the lead dominoes in our health. And literally, as they say, the answer is right under our noses. The answer is our nose, right? And what's underneath our nose, which is our mouth, which is essentially, part and parcel our breathing apparatus. And so as I started exploring breath, from a physical standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, from a physiological standpoint, everything changed and just opened up a whole new world for me to understand that the body, in its infinite wisdom and intelligence, actually utilizes the breath to pump every fluid in the body, to pump the entire myofascial matrix, to assist the heart in circulation, to assist the lymph nodes in moving lymph. And it's the steering wheel of our nervous system. And so once you understand that and start applying it, the breath is the thing that we can change the fastest and actually see benefits the fastest as well. So I believe that the importance of something in our health is inversely proportional to how long you can live without it, which means that, you can't not breathe for more than 5 or 6 minutes and you're a vegetable, right?
Over.
You can not eat for 30 days. You can not drink water for, almost a week. You can not sleep for a couple of days, but you can't not breathe for more than a few minutes. So that in and of itself should tell us how important it is. And then when you start studying the granularity of breathing, you start realizing that this one simple act that we do 23,000 times a day, whether we like it or not, can literally change every aspect of our life. And so that's why I love speaking about it, because it's so simple, so effective, so affordable, so scalable, and there's nothing to buy, right? You already have the equipment, you have the billion-dollar piece of equipment. You just have to learn how to use it.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, and for those in the audience who are data geeks, I know I'm a data geek, so I wear a Kickstarter ring, I wear the watch, I kind of track everything, but you don't need to do that. For the sake of argument, after our conversation we had, whenever that event, we are now recording in March of 2024. I think the event we were both at was in September 23 or in the fall of 2023. But my sleep index is pretty decent. It tends to be in the mid 80s. But then what I started doing after your conversation around the types of breathing and taking control of it, tracking the snoring, because everyone thinks they don't snore, but you do until you track that. I started thinking about the roof to the tongue of my mouth. What I've been seeing a lot more consistently now by taking a conscious effort, and it literally just takes 5 minutes, just a few minutes before bed. It's not like what you are advocating to the world is some 3-hour morning routine and a 4-hour shutdown routine, because most people will have a bad reaction to that. They said, well, I can't possibly do that. What I found, at least in my personal experience, I've been able to take control a little bit of improving even my sleep by focusing on my breathing, in terms of by taking a deep breath and exhaling. And it's just, for me, and again, everybody's different. You've got different experiences, genetics, biomarkers, the whole 9 yards. But I just found like 5 to 10 minutes before going to bed or sometime in the evening, taking a deep breath and doing the, I forgot what's the name of the breathing that you called in the event.
4-7-8 breath.
Yeah, that one. And I've noticed that my sleep recovery score, I get a lot more nights where I'm into the 90s now. So my sleep recovery has always been pretty good into the mid to high 80s. But I'm a typical type A business leader, entrepreneur. Like, I got to get 100, right? And 100 is pretty hard. You got to do some pretty extreme things like what Brian Johnson talks about. But I've been getting a lot into the 92 to 95 range, just literally by breathing. And so I've been very rhythmic with my sleep. I'm basically like a toddler. Like, I need my sleep, but then I don't function. But then I think the piece that really helped me was the breathing, which is what you talked about. And can you talk a little about the format? What is, 2 or 3 good breathing techniques? And then what happens from a physiological perspective? Because a lot of times people say, well, eat your veggies, eat your fruit. A lot of experts will pontificate a certain remedy, but not really get into the functional perspective of it. And I know in talking with you, you talk about when this happens, that happens, and this happens. And I was like, oh, I got to take notes, So if you can indulge me in that conversation in the audience one more time, we would appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for asking. So first and foremost, there's a breath for everything. And I actually just recently created a guide that I'm happy to share with you. And you can pass that on to your audience. And it's called Breathe Like This, Not That. And so depending on the state that you're in and the state that you want to get to, the breath is the bridge to get you there. So for example, if you want more energy, you can do something called bellows breath. Bellows breath is where we rapidly expand and contract our lungs, and we take rapid, forceful inhales and exhales as we move our arms, up and down. So we inhale sharply as our arms go up and exhale sharply as our arms come down. And you can use your mouth or your nose, whatever's comfortable for you. You're going to do that 30 times, rest for 30 seconds, and do that 3 times. So you're doing a total of 90 repetitions. This raises your adrenaline, raises your blood pressure. You're going to feel an increased alertness and focus. And we lovingly call it yogic coffee because it gives you a jolt of energy. And, for people who have high blood pressure, we obviously don't advise them to do this, but it will give them almost like an energy drink type of feeling without having the caffeine hangover. So that's called bellows breath. Now, the opposite is what we call coherence breath. And coherence breath is how we would be breathing. For example, as you're listening to me speak, you could be using your coherence breathing technique, which is breathing in for a count of 6 and breathing out for a count of 6. When we breathe in this coherence breathing pattern, it connects our heart and our brain. It brings us to be more present to whatever situation that we're in. Our tongue is gently placed at the roof of the mouth. We're breathing in and out through our nose. And we're not breathing in fully and exhaling fully, right? That would be a weird way to walk and a weird way to breathe. For example, if you were to walk your biggest stride with every step on a walk, you'd look silly. And so breathing is generally shallow and inaudible. So the less you breathe, the better. So it kind of sounds paradoxical, but most people overbreathe. So when you're sitting there listening to this podcast, or when you're sitting on a Zoom meeting, if you want to improve and optimize your breath and have a calm, relaxed nervous system, the less you breathe, the better. So you can breathe in as little as possible for 6 seconds and out as little as possible for 6 seconds without straining or stressing yourself. But the slower you breathe, and the less you breathe, the more relaxed your body becomes. And so it sounds opposite of what most people think, that the average person overbreathes. And so breathing less and breathing at a slower pace, less volume, slower pace, that's going to help relax us. What that also does is it increases our CO2 levels. When we increase CO2, it actually allows more oxygen to be delivered to the tissue. It's called the Bohr effect for the nerds out there like me. And so the Bohr effect, basically causes more oxygen to be delivered the less we breathe. In fact, the faster somebody breathes, if somebody's, kind of short of breath or, breathing as fast as they can, they actually don't clear out the carbon dioxide very effectively. And so the slower we breathe, the more effectively we clear out the carbon dioxide, and also the more oxygen we get to the tissue. So that's called coherence breathing. Coherence breathing has been shown to increase our blood oxygenation of the brain, or oxygenation of the brain rather. And what's interesting about the way we breathe is the way we breathe gives others a sense of safety. And we all know how important safety is if we're leading a team, if we're going through a challenging time, if we're sitting next to our partner, right? We want them to feel safe around us. And if we're breathing erratically, and that might be unconscious to us, that's sending off an electromagnetic signature into that environment. But if your breathing is calm, gentle, slow, then the people around you, including your own self, start to feel much safer.
Yeah, I think, and I used, I don't know, which is the one that you take a deep breath and you exhale, but when you triggered a thought that I've been using when playing hockey after a conversation, was the clearance of carbon dioxide and the physiological effect. And I think I would have been one, despite, it's like me trying to be a criminal lawyer, arguing with a criminal lawyer about something. It's like, I'm not educated in that. So like most people, they say, well, that's just hogwash or that's not true. And I think what I want the audience to take away, and what you alluded to, is what actually happened in the oxygenation at a molecular level. I think you know him too. He's become a friend of mine, Connor Carrick. And he said on a podcast where you cannot, and I would have been guilty of doing this, you can't outmind bad biology. And so at a molecular level, when you talk about these breathing techniques and there is a molecular thing that's happening, whether you're in a flight, a sympathetic or parasympathetic response system. Your body at a molecular level has absolutely no clue whether it is a saber-toothed tiger or an exam paper you're about to write or you're about to go for an interview. At a molecular level, it has absolutely no idea what's going on. It's just cells at a mitochondrial level and whatnot, just responding to stimuli.
Hmm.
And I think what I like about what you've talked about and you've alluded to here is by controlling your breath, because energy flows where our thoughts go, is you can now take control of the molecular things that are happening, to your point earlier, in the most powerful way. We can't go for more than a few minutes without air or breath. Even the world's deepest divers, they can go several minutes, but that's about it.
Hmm.
Um, to your point, without water, you can go some time, without food, some time, sleep, and all the other things we think that we tend to prioritize. But I just want to call to action for the audience the importance of, like, this stuff is real. Like, you can believe it or not believe it, but at the end of the day, this is actually what's happening at a molecular level. And despite what race you may be programmed, the Homo sapiens species is programmed at a molecular level to respond in this fashion. So this is not a Eastern world, Western world, North hemisphere, South hemisphere. Like, if you're a person, you probably listen to this will apply to you, and embrace the power of breath. Even for me within hockey, I don't know what it's called, but I've taken deep breaths in through my nose and I've exhaled out. Because something you said about clearing carbon dioxide from my
Hmm.
system, which led to the lactic acid explosion in my muscles. So now when I go on the bench, and I've noticed that my stamina intensity has increased on hockey, is that I'm sitting there focusing on my breathing until the next guy says off, and then I jump onto the ice. And for me, I've noticed it's made a huge difference, and I'm not stressed after it. I'm like, I'm not as tired as I used to be, because I'm clearing the carbon dioxide, I'm clearing the lactic acid in my muscle, to the point where, all right, I'm in my 40s, I can't go 4-4 forever, but the last couple of weeks of hockey have been bad. But we have been going 4-4 for an hour. And so I am tired when I get home at night, but when I wake up the next day, it's as if nothing happened, right? Because I have focused on what you talked about, what Connor said about biology. I'm like, no matter what I think, I cannot outrun bad biology. Like, you can't outmind diabetes or cancer or stress. Like, these are real things that require physical molecular responses. Can you talk a little bit about the deep inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth, and that carbon, or maybe I got it all wrong and it works for me by accident, but there was a name for that, and maybe I don't know if that's bellowed breath that I was doing, but I'm not an expert like you, but I took away a lot of things that you said, and I used them, and they're amazing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And sometimes the names don't matter, right? The nomenclature just is great for
Just a
convenience.
label.
But so I'll go through the different gears of breathing, and this will be applicable to the athletes like yourself that are listening. So normal breathing is what I call coherence breathing. So your baseline breathing, 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, tongue gently placed at
Yeah.
the roof of the mouth, and that's our normal breathing pattern. And then we want to try to maintain that breathing pattern until we can't. And then we might speed up our inhales and exhales. So as we increase our exertion level, we might start breathing a little bit faster. And then we start breathing in through our nose, going into the second gear and breathing out through our mouth, in through our nose, out through our mouth. When we breathe in through our nose, we get the air that's coming in goes through a processing inside the sinus cavities and nasal turbinates that basically perfect the air. They moisture regulate the air, they temperature regulate the air, they cleanse the air of particulate matter, they kill viruses and bacteria on contact. So your immune system actually starts in your nose. It's your initial defense against the outside world. Every day we breathe in 30 pounds of air. So we consume more air and exchange more gases than we do with food. Food, we might eat a pound or two. Water, we might drink a pound or two, but we consume 30 pounds of air every day. So our lungs have to interact with all that air on a daily basis. And the significance of that's important for people to note is the air is filtered and perfected when it goes in through the nose. Now, the purpose of the nose is to slow down the air. By slowing down the air, it pressurizes it, temperature regulates it, moisture regulates it, and cleanses it. So it's always going to feel more resistive to breathe in through the nose. But here's what's cool about that is you actually get more oxygen delivery when you breathe through your nose. There's actually about a 20% increase in oxygenation because you're taking a
Yeah.
pressurized breath you're actually getting a deeper breath into the alveoli where that gaseous exchange takes place. And then as you're exerting yourself, you're going to breathe out through your mouth because that's the fastest way to push the air out. So that's going to clear out that carbon dioxide. And so we call that circular breathing. So in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Now, if you want to recover faster, then you would actually slow down your exhale. So by slowing down your exhale, it's going to help bring your nervous system into a more calm state. Okay. So once you feel like you've cleared out that CO2, it's going to keep building up, but slowing down the exhale is going to increase your tolerance to CO2, and that's going to deliver more oxygen to the tissue. So it's going to recover faster. And then once we go into an all-out sprint, then you can breathe in and out through your mouth. Now, the significance of that, and here's what's interesting to note, is that it's not just the molecular and microscopic physiology that's at play here, but it's also the gross anatomy that's at play. So when you're going in an all-out sprint, you want to have maximum blood pressure happening at the same time. And so we want to move as much air in and out of our mouth as we can, because the mouth is an unobstructed, intake and exhaust, if you will. And by rapidly expanding and contracting the lungs and moving the diaphragm up and down, now you're mechanically assisting the heart in pumping blood. So by breathing rapidly, it increases blood pressure as well. So in an all-out sprint where you want maximum blood pressure, maximum blood flow to the periphery, and you want the heart pumping as fast and as hard as it can without exploding, you use the lungs and the diaphragm to assist you in that breathing. And then once that sprint is over, we go back to in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, slowly out of the mouth. And then we go back and work our way back to 6 in, 6 out. So that's how you'd gear up and then gear down with your breathing.
So it's interesting you say that, because what I've been trying to do, and whether you're a runner or a cyclist or a pelotonist or whatever, in my instance, hockey is my vice, but I'll just try to explain for the audience what I've done. So I did my DNA test, and some people are short twitch, long twitch, and again, we won't get into the DNA side of it, but I know that based on my genetics, that I'm balanced and sort of short twitch and long twitch muscles. And so what I try to do with the breathing in through my nose and then out through my mouth, I try to increase my oxygenation by 20%. And I exhale by clearing out the carbon dioxide. And what I find, because based on my genetics and my heart rate and my theoretical heart maximum, when I do that on the bench, I find that my heart rate goes down to a more level, like to a lower level quicker than what I had typically had done is I had stayed in that exertion mode where I'm on the bench, kind of keeled over, breathing through my mouth. That's what I used to do. But I changed after your talk, when we talked a little while back, and I focused into my nose, out through my mouth, into my nose, out to my mouth, and try to get rhythmic to get to the slow pace. So hopefully by the next time I go back on, I'm getting to the coherent state where I'm breathing normal. My heart rate has been dropped down 20 to 30 beats per minute. Then I can go sprint again. Now athletes are pros, so they probably do this subconsciously, but I'm not a pro athlete, clearly. But I'm trying to take the learnings of those techniques and combine it with both my genetics, because we're all a little bit wired differently. So okay.
And one thing I'll say, Davide, is that most athletes have never been taught how to breathe. So
I believe that.
They are completely many of them are completely dysfunctional breathers. And so when we work with athletes, one of the things that we tell them is that their next level breakthrough in their health, but also in their performance, is going to be once they learn how to breathe, because it's the most important thing that we do that nobody's taught us how to do.
It seems that like the concept of breath, and I'll be guilty of it, is something that we just obviously take for granted. Right? We're born with it. You get smacked if you're not crying. Wah, wah. And then all of a sudden, that's it. You're actually never taught. And I've always been pretty business oriented, health oriented, and aware. But for me, in terms of the concept of breath, has not really been brought up probably in the last maybe 5-7 years at the most. Like in 2014, let's say we go 10 years from now, like very few people would probably talk about breath, I would imagine. Whereas now I think there's more meditation apps, there's more breath apps, not a lot. I still think it's grossly undeveloped. I still think it's, to your point, professional athletes probably don't do it. Like, even there was a hockey player in the Leafs, I don't know if it was Renberg or whatever. Anyway, he was in his late 30s and he was doing cold therapy 7, 8 years ago. And I used to laugh at him, like, oh, what the heck is that guy doing? Like, but he was probably onto breath and probably onto cold therapy and all these other things to control that. But when did this concept of, I don't know if I would say it's mainstream, and I'm hoping part of our journey today is to bring it more mainstream, but it seems that within business circles and entrepreneurial circles, the concept and the power of breath is that the drumbeat getting a little bit louder. Where did it start? And then what is the world that you see in the future as it relates to breath and whatnot?
Yeah. So, so breathing has been around in the East as a modality for literally thousands and thousands of years. And of course, we've been breathing for as long as we know as human beings. When you live high in the mountains where oxygen is scarce, where temperatures are cold, and you have nothing to do, you go inwards. And what the ancients discovered is they can use their breath to really manipulate their body in desired ways, manipulate their emotions to decide how they want to feel. But one of the things that we can also observe is that when we experience something, the first tool that our nervous system uses to change our physical self is our breath. So for example, if you experience something stressful, you gasp, right? That's a expansion of the lungs. When you feel a sense of relief, you sigh, right? That's getting rid of that CO2 and getting rid of and releasing the tension in the shoulders, right? We're dropping our shoulders. When you laugh, that's a form of breathing. It's a breathing signature. When you cry, that's a breathing signature. So, once you start observing, our body's been using breath. It's the first thing that changes in our physiology when our state changes and our nervous system resorts to it. So it's been around for a long time. I think that it gained a lot of popularity through yoga, because yoga is actually more about breathing than it is about the postures. And yoga means union, and it's a great way to connect with ourselves is to connect with our breath. In Chinese medicine, it's called qi or ki. In Ayurvedic medicine, it's called prana, which is the life force. So it's been recognized for quite some time. Now, they not only understood the esoteric impacts of breathing, but they also understood the physical impacts of breathing and how we can use breathing to regulate our temperature, how we can use breathing to concentrate oxygen where oxygen levels are low in the mountains. They utilize breathing to change their mood, right, and their emotional states.
Right.
So we've known this for quite some time. And now in the West, we have tools that can measure these effects, right? So we have instruments, if you will, that can measure the implications on our brain. We have instruments that can measure the changes in temperature, the changes in heart rate, and in HRV. So in our Western society, we like to validate things, spend millions of dollars researching and studying them, when instead we could just start doing them. I think a big tipping point for the breathing world was the coronavirus, because it was a respiratory virus that also coincided with James Nestor's book Breath being released, and that I think really put breathing on the map for people, because he did such a great job as a journalist describing breathing. So he had an unbiased viewpoint and perspective, and a neutral, examination of the topic. And I think he did a lot of great work for the breath world, if you will. And then, I came across this through Wim Hof. One of the first breathing practices that I learned was the Wim Hof breathing method.
Yeah.
And, so I think Wim Hof we owe a lot of debt to Wim Hof for bringing this. But he basically took, ancient wisdom from the East and started modernizing it and applying it in very unusual ways, like extreme cold exposure. He kind of popularized that, cold plunging, things like that, and preparing the body by using the breath to mentally overcome the challenge and the stimulus, but also to change the physiology to be prepared for the challenge of cold exposure. So I think there's a lot of people that we can attribute this to. And I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help people see it through all the different lenses and facets that they can. And I've learned from James Nestor. I've interviewed him a couple times and been on a retreat with him as well. We've become good friends over the years. And I like to learn from people who are, on the cutting edge of this information. But what I realize is that even I'm scratching the surface of the surface. So
Yeah.
there's so much depth to this topic. And I'm glad that, Western society is picking up on it, because now that we have the instruments to measure the physical and spiritual and emotional effects of breathing on our body, it will further validate it. And I think that the only resistance that comes up when it comes to breathing is that it's so simple. And
Mm.
people are almost in disbelief that how can this one simple thing do so many positive things for me? It almost seems too good to be true. And in this
Right.
instance, it's one of those things that isn't too good to be true. It is the truth. And it's the holy grail of what we've all been looking for. Like, we all want something. Like, if I were to ask you, like, what would you wish as a solution for healthcare? You'd want something that's simple, something that's easy to measure, something that's easy to
Yeah.
do, something that likely we're already doing. So we don't have to like buy anything or acquire anything. We already have it. And
Yeah.
it's something that we all do, whether we like it or not. It's a necessary thing for us to do. So we don't have to change our diets. We don't have to have a new exercise program. It's like one of those things that you're already doing it sitting there right now, and you could be doing it in such a way that ultimately improves your health. There's a huge kick for longevity. I know you're big into longevity,
Hmm.
and here's what's interesting. So the slower an animal breathes, the longer it lives. So a turtle, for example, lives a couple hundred years, only takes about 4 breaths a minute. A dog, on the other hand, ages about 7 times faster than a human, breathes 37 times a minute. So when you
Mm.
look at when you plot out a graph of respiratory rate and longevity, the slower you breathe, the longer you live. And the Eastern philosophy has always known this. So in Eastern medicine, they say, you're born with a certain number of breaths. In Western medicine, they say you're born with a certain number of heartbeats. Well, guess what? You can actually control your heartbeat by controlling
Through
your
your
breath.
breath. Yeah.
So it ultimately overrides that system. And so the other thing that's interesting about breathing is that lung capacity is the greatest predictor of lifespan. And that makes sense, because if your lung capacity goes down to zero, your lifespan is zero. But if you can
Yeah.
keep breathing and you can keep oxygenating your mitochondria, well, you can keep living, right? So
Yeah.
there's an interesting thing about breath too that's important to note is that we learn a lot about oxygen, right? We think of oxygen when we think of breathing. However, the reason we breathe is to get rid of CO2. And what we're going to learn in the next few years is how important CO2 is as a signaling molecule. We've kind of villainized CO2 and carbon dioxide as a society, but it's actually one of the most important molecules in all of nature. And so we produce it, which makes us special. It's a toxin to us, but it also makes us special because we produce it. And it's part of our symbiotic relationship with the rest of the earth as well.
I remember, I don't remember hearing about that. I definitely don't have enough details to talk about the carbon dioxide side of things, but I've heard this before where it has been an enemy and it's actually not. I don't know enough about it. And at this point, beyond the scope of the rest of the time we have. But I think to your point around living longer and slower breathing, it's really interesting because I think it kind of goes back to what state that we putting our body in. And I think when you're in a high stress, high state, high tension, so think about running, think about you're angry, you tend to, at least I know, but you tend to breathe really heavy, really fast, really heavy. But when you are relaxed and using the power breath, you can put your, nervous system to a more calm state. And ultimately, the root of all challenges from a health perspective tend to come from inflammation. And so through breathing, and I think through breathing slow, even if you're just sort of chill, it's sort of like the surfer dude mentality. Yeah, that's okay. But like they're not stressed out about anything and they're totally breathing kind of chill. So I think that's really interesting. I think I've heard you say that, but it really strung through. The slower you breathe, the longer you live. And having a dog, and I can sometimes see my dog Dexter, breathing really fast. I'm like, you're just sitting there, but that's just the animal that they are. But it's a beautiful little thing to see where if you could control your breathing, and we can as humans, and how the impact it can have and how we show up in life, whether it's in business, in a relationship. There was a fellow, he was talking about like box breathing and how first responders use box breathing. And for the audience, box breathing is, I think, the same amount of seconds in and out. I don't know if there's a science behind the number, but in for X, out for X, in for X, out for X, and just kind of go through that. Before we kind of wrap up the podcast, can you talk a little bit about box breathing and how we can maybe, because most businesses most business leaders and entrepreneurs and athletes are always in a constant state of the chase, the hunt, the feeling of stress. It's one of the things that I use to kind of calm myself down and use the bellows techniques as well to get to the coherence breathing. Can you talk a little bit about the box breathing and how that works, and maybe explain that a little bit for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So box breathing is probably one of the most popular breathing techniques, and anything that lengthens the exhale puts us in a deeper state of relaxation. So when you're box breathing, traditional box breathing is about 4 seconds. It could be 5, it could be 6, it could be whatever you want it to be. But essentially, box breathing is where you breathe in for, let's say, 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold on empty for 4 seconds, and then you breathe in again for 4 seconds. So basically, think of a box and you're breathing in, holding for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, in for 4, hold for 4. You just go through that pattern. Now that's breathing in for 4 seconds and essentially breathing out for 12 seconds. So you're lengthening the amount of time to exhale, which puts us in a more relaxed state. So it's a really quick way and a fast way for us to go from feeling stressed out to going into a state of relaxation.
Makes sense. Where can people find out more about you and what you're up to? And we'll put it in the show notes and whatnot. But if you can rhyme off your handles and where people can find you for those listening in and driving on the road.
Yeah, sure. So Facebook is where I share a lot of great content. At least I think it's great. Simple, practical tips for people to improve their overall health and wellness. And our website for people who want to connect with us is becomeproof.com. And breathing is really one of the facets that we work on with our metabolic clients. And so I work with entrepreneurs and men specifically to really help them unlock that next level of their business and their business through their health, really, and coach them through an entire protocol. So breathing is one of those aspects of that protocol, probably one of the most important and overlooked aspects of that protocol. And we help people, have that next level breakthrough for themselves. So people can find out more about what we do there if they're looking for metabolic optimization. And certainly I have a free tool that I like to share with everyone about breathing specifically. So if they go to breathworkwithsachin.com, then they can learn more about some of the breathing tools and modalities and strategies. There's a couple of keynotes in there. There's some experiential breath work that they can have access to as well. And they'll also get my guide, Breathe Like This, Not That. So they learn how to use breathing in different scenarios, whether they're having a panic attack, whether they're feeling tired, whether they're feeling restless and they can't get to sleep at night. There's a technique for each of those different ways you want to feel. And I share those in that simple guide that I'll include as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I think the core takeaway is we have the most powerful tool, like you said, quite literally under our nose. It is our nose. I think we can use the power of breath to respond to business challenges, personal challenges, relationship challenges, whatever whatever life wants to throw at us. Ultimately, I continue to believe that Mother Nature, she has given us everything we absolutely need. And I think the ability to tap into that and understand, really follow simple practices. You don't need a PhD for this. If you want to understand the science, you certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, trust that this works. And I remember when you led a session, I'll leave off with this, is that we went through a few of your breathing techniques, and I almost felt lightheaded and levitating because I felt the energy, I felt the relaxation, and it's something that I always look to emulate. And ultimately, there are a lot of addictions in the Western world. There's social media, cigarettes, fast food. But if you can get addicted to your health and get addicted to the concept of breath, there's so much that you can unlock in your own potential